Let's begin the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting of
Yes.
May 1st. Any announcements?
Well, the only announcement I have, this will be, let's not say the last, but this is my time I'm taking for a bit of hiatus.
Oh, really?
I'm wrapping it up for this, just for a time being to take some time off because my daughter's heading to college and we're all, settled in and everything. But I always say never. Sort of like the Marvel comics, you always bring the hero back again. So
Yeah, that's perfect. It's not even a metaphor. It's just a continuation of a description of
it's
the
like a
idea.
multiverse thing. I can come back in a different form, but
Wait, how many versions of the land use regs do we need if it's a multiverse?
There you go.
One is enough.
I think
Wait, so does your term end in June, or you're just in?
yes, my term does end in June, but I thought maybe
Skip the last one.
take a year off or two to see if we could get some fresh, new, young prospective candidates, prospects in there too, to
Okay.
open up that door for other people who might have interest, which there's a lot of people now noticing the committees that are out there that would like to join. And I've heard a lot of people ask
Right.
questions, so I said, well, that'd be great. I mean, go get your feet wet, get some time in there with the town and get involved.
I hope the public is listening. That will mean that we'll have 2 vacancies. Well, you'll let us know if you'll be here for the June meeting or not.
Oh, yes, definitely.
You will, okay. Oh, so very
Be
good.
cake and ice
Serving
cream.
out your term. How professional.
Absolutely.
A lot of people just resign when they want to. Nice to honor the terms of the term. I think since Sarah Lang isn't here and she more or less spearheaded that Strong Towns competition of submitting Brattleboro, I'll just say that we won. Maybe everyone already knows, but we are deemed the strongest town of the Strong Towns competition. There's plenty of press and literature all about that, so one can easily do an internet search to learn more.
Strongest town of America, is it?
For this year.
For this year of the submission.
I mean, we're good in that arena, which I can accept.
It included at least Canada.
Yeah.
Years
Wow.
ago. I've had
Okay.
Australian
That
applicants.
says a lot. We're going
Yeah.
universal now.
Yeah, international.
Yeah.
And with the walk bike plan that was presented to the select board on April 18th,
Yeah.
and the select board wholeheartedly endorsed it. Is
That's
that
correct.
accurate?
Yes.
Yep, so that project has wrapped up.
Fantastic. So now the town has a comprehensive masterish plan for walking and biking and other related forms of active transportation in order to make all these little projects easier in the future with a common vision underpinning them. Any other announcements?
Well, I'm gonna be Ian good now to this for tomorrow, but this Friday we have our first gallery walk coming up.
Oh, yeah.
And that'll be great to see all our, people out there, new and old, and
Mhm.
just come visit and get together and come together and pretty much, as a community, have fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have done some work on the planning commission with thinking of public spaces and how they can be used differently. And
Yeah.
gallery walk in the last couple of years has kind of shown
Yeah.
how spaces, at least temporarily, can be used differently. Okay, if there's no more announcements, let's consider the minutes of, I didn't write that. The minutes of last meeting, April, whenever that was.
No, it's April 4th. The
April
agenda
4th.
says April 3rd. Seems to be consistently wrong on the agenda.
Oh.
I move that we approve the minutes from our April meeting.
Second that. Any discussion about the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Hi.
It's the 3 of us here plus Dan. Okay, all in favor? All are in favor. Yeah. Okay, moving on to a few things first that we have seen before, and they've maybe been revised a bit by staff after hearing our comments and concerns. The first one is, so this is a series of proposed changes in our land use regs, most having to do with housing, as is our main theme of work lately. Section 303D is about multifamily housing design standards, and I don't want to go into presenting it too much because staff are the ones who wrote the current version. I don't know if we need it up on screen, but I think we all have it in front of us.
I don't know if it goes up on screen to people out there in.
Oh, maybe that's good for the
Zoom
public.
land, see what we're-
Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe that would be a good idea so they can get a better purview.
Steve's gonna bring it up.
Okay.
While we're waiting to pull that up, I didn't see anything on here that was different than what was discussed in the last meeting, that this was really a tidy up of that, is that correct?
It is correct. Yeah, I think you had wanted the either or where they could provide kind of semi-public open space or the private open spaces, so, yeah. you're
So there was a
just-
little rewording there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then my question regarding that is, how might it work if like half of the units have their own private or semi-private space and then the other half don't? They'd still need to have the 400 square foot of common open space?
It would be 400 combined square feet between the two options for the entire project.
Oh, so the private space square footage would add up?
Yes, if that doesn't seem clear in the way that it's written, I'd be happy to amend that for the final language. But I believe
Yeah.
that was the intent.
I see, at least 400 square feet of overall area for open space in accordance with one or both.
It is kind of an interesting consequence I hadn't considered, that it could be that some units would have semi-private space and some of them wouldn't have anything. Which does seem unfortunate, but I don't know that it's,
Right, like, yeah, could that be possible? Half of the units have private space, half of them don't, and the half that have it, all of their private square footage adds up to 400 or more combined. So then the half that don't have it just don't have access to any of that broken apart 400 square foot.
I wonder whether the line, the open space must be accessible to all residents of the development, could be moved up rather than it being just within the common or public open space. Because if one way or the other, open space is available to everyone, I think that challenge is addressed.
Mm-hmm. Right?
So you're saying make that an A?
So taking point A2,
Mhm.
open space must be accessible to all residents. If we moved that up so that it was not inside A or B, but common to the entirety of the
Okay.
section.
And removing the word "the," just,
Sure.
right? Because
Sure.
if there's multiples, open space must be accessible to all residents of the development. And then the residents either get it through their private space
Mhm.
or the common space, or in some cases both.
Oh, yeah.
I think that addresses it. Concern.
Dan may have had a hand.
I don't see his hand up or any. Yeah, do you have any thoughts, Dan, or comments?
No, I was just going to remind Steve that the document was not being shared, but it is now, so.
Oh, okay. Other than that, me personally, I didn't have any other, I think this is a good revision.
Mhm.
And make the housing more possible and still, it's reasonable.
I move that we approve the language regarding 303D multifamily housing as amended in this meeting.
Second.
Any further discussion about this? Dan, Gary, Tom, Lena? No? Oh, I see Dan unmuted.
Well, I wasn't at the prior meeting to this, and I'm sorry, well, in any case, I'm just curious if there was any discussion about the public open space proximity, the quarter-mile radius, just curious.
What about it?
What was is that coming from somewhere, or is that a standard of some sort?
Before we answer that, could you share the version that shows the amendments? I think that helps make it just a little bit clearer.
Gotcha.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, so Dan, that's from the existing language. I reworded it slightly because I personally think that the way we have it written is open-ended as to how the definition would actually be understood for places that don't have a sidewalk. And that is, it's possible it was intended to be exclusionary of counting places that were within a half or quarter mile of a public park, but without sidewalk. That may well have been the intent, but it seemed like it was unclear. So that was rewritten to just be a quarter mile radius, which I actually think may well be slightly less generous than the following a sidewalk counting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking walking distance versus radius, but I think, yeah, that's interesting to make that comparison. But I really was wondering about the quarter mile number, but it's part of the prior open space section.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quarter mile is also, if I recall, you know, it's just kind of an easy walk that most people could do. It's not taking you too long to get there. I think that, and for its kind of comparison, if you look at like the state's neighborhood designation, and that's a half-mile radius, you know, I think that's kind of like a 10-minute walk, something like that. So, you know, these are supposed to be short walks where you can access some open space.
Mm-hmm.
My experience has been that quarter mile and half mile radii are used fairly commonly to identify walking distances for various things, transit-oriented development and parks and such.
I just have a feeling we're gonna move through this agenda quickly, so I feel like we can pause a moment, Dan, if you need to skim another minute.
No worries. I was really just, my apologies for not catching up
That's
with
okay.
everything, but it's been, that makes, you know, it's fine with me. I suppose I was just curious.
Okay. So if there's no more discussion, we have a motion that's been made and seconded, so all those in favor, raise your hand, please. That's Dan, myself, the three of us, that's all of us, great. Moving on to section 303A, attached housing standards. This was also, but we didn't talk about this much last time, because it came in sort of late.
Oh, it spilled over, I was looking to leave the part.
So maybe, yeah.
So I've put up the language here first. I've got some accompanying visuals for any additional interest. I think it might help clarify why this seems necessary, to me at least, as compared to the way that the language was written in the last draft that we saw. But if anyone has any questions about the language first, I'd be happy to go through it.
Sure.
Are we missing this part? Yeah. This is something.
No, that's the whole
Oh,
document,
okay,
those
just
three
wanted to be
pages.
sure, 'cause I looked for the other, okay.
I have a question. For number 4, footprint lots, an attached housing unit may alternatively be subdivided on, quote, footprint lots equal to the footprint of the unit in accordance with section 444 of these regulations. I looked at section 444, I didn't really see I didn't grok the relevance.
So that is from the January 19th proposed language. There may be an existing section 444 that is renumbered.
Oh. An existing.
Did you look at the current regulations?
I did.
or the- Okay, so this is referring to
It's in
the.
Brandy's revised.
folder.
Oh,
Yeah.
can you call that up somehow? Because I didn't know.
Can you still see what I'm sharing, Dan?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, right.
That's a rough color.
Yeah, that's the entirety of it.
Oh, yeah, and we already looked through that, right? And
Yes.
felt fine with that. Okay.
Yeah, so primarily the difference between what's being described in 444, which is equivalent to the building footprint itself, and what's being described here in the proposed 303A, is a specific type of lot dimensional standards that would apply to attached housing being subdivided with land. Because the attached housing has specific geometry to it that detached buildings don't, which makes it unique in that regard. So, for example, end units have one side setback and middle units have none. So then if the frontage of the lots and the overall square footage of the lots remains the same as a typical lot for a detached structure, you're gonna get odd outcomes that are not intended, I don't believe.
And then for 5A, the removal of the provision, at least 50% of dwelling units must have a ground floor entrance that faces a street or common open space. What was the thinking there?
So the thing there is, anecdotally, I've certainly seen and been in and experienced attached housing forms where more than 2 units shared a sort of vestibule, where I guess that would not technically count towards what we've got on the books right now, where at least 50% of the units would need to have their own entrance to the street. So there are certainly examples of attached housing where perhaps 3 or 4 units have a small hallway that has one single door to the street, but then individual entrances from that particular hallway. And I think that that's entirely feasible within typical attached housing sort of deed descriptions of where the subdivision between units actually will occur. So I think staff's understanding was that we don't really feel any need to specifically dictate that type of form.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense to me.
Just got one question.
Sure, Gary.
Where it says building design A, units that have an attached garages built must be located the garage at, I'm just trying to get the language on this. Units that have an attached garages or garage, vehicle entrance must be, you took out the B or just must located the garage at,
Must locate the garage at or behind the building front line.
okay, just wanted to
Yeah, it's a little funny on the strikeout
Yeah.
version.
I just,
Oh yeah, if you want to look at the clean version, it might be a little
let's just see a
more.
rough draft.
Mhm.
Like writing a book.
So this is related to housing where each unit is individually owned, duplexes, townhouses, row houses, etc.
Mhm.
I guess duplex wouldn't necessarily fit into that category, but is there anything, coming back to this piece about 50% of the dwellings having a ground floor entrance, is there anything related to fire code or addressing or anything like that that needs to be considered here? Into making sure people can be found if needed?
For addressing, there wouldn't be any complications with that. You know, I could certainly look into whether it would need to be addressed as units within a building with one number, or if they could each have their own street number. But that's certainly doable without any issue. Myself in that role, or whoever would be the E911 coordinator at some point in the future would certainly be able to handle that. I'm not sure if there are any implications for building code in that way, but I don't believe that it would be necessarily an issue, at least in terms of a small number of units, like 4, for example, having a shared staircase for access, but only for those handful of units, and having that be iterated through the row versus having 2 units access 1. I think if it was going to be a fire code problem, it probably would be also relevant to 2 units sharing a door in essence. But we can certainly look into that as well. Dan has his hand up.
Sure.
Yes, just about number 5, building design. I just don't know if this is a matter for the design review board versus us, or how much we need to chime in on that. I'm just curious, you know, just sort of whether we need to get into that or not, but I suppose it's worth, you know, mentioning, but that perhaps the design review board could be involved in that as well.
Well, the design review committee as currently formed just deals with the historic districts.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, our regs have, you know, standards like in section 5 for all sorts of different uses, so it doesn't seem out of
Mhm.
order in my mind.
Yeah, these, I mean, even the one with the garage being at the building, or at or behind the building front line, I mean, that's consistent across, well, for our residential zoning districts as well.
Yeah, I do think it's redundant, so if we wanted to see it removed for that,
Oh.
we could certainly entertain that.
I think for clarity, I'd rather it stay.
Yeah, both interpretations are totally valid. It's likely to come out the same way in build form regardless, but that's in essence just keeping language from the existing.
Okay, so 5B then, what does that mean, exceed 400 feet in linear? What is that? Is that area, is that square feet or linear
In frontage.
frontage? Okay.
Linear feet, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that, and thank you for mentioning that. That was specifically the question I was aiming to avoid because of the ambiguity in the existing language, and then seemed to have forgotten to include that specific edit in this language. So let's.
So that 400 linear feet, that's not mentioned anywhere else? This would be the only place, or is that?
Yeah, and
Yes.
I would certainly be amenable to not including that for reasons of expecting that to work itself out through our other standards, and also just being unlikely that this would actually be attractive as a development type. 400 plus feet, it probably would cease to be economically feasible, but we had the 360, and we figured if we pop it up to 400, it might allow for a slightly more flexible build form. So I think that's.
We did this, we measured a couple of weeks ago. Do you recall? I feel like the distance between High Street and Elliott Street, that block of Main Street, I think was like 380, 380 feet, something like that, just as a comparison.
And I think we had also found that there were some sort of suburban style commercial strips that were in excess of that in one linear frontage, which obviously is not what we're intending on reproducing with this, but just for reference of, we do have some building facades that are that long or longer, but they're not incredibly common.
And this is referring to frontage in particular rather than dimension in any direction? So a building could be longer than that if,
Front to back.
yeah, front to back, if the parcel it was on could accommodate that.
Right, I think it would be very unlikely, but it could happen.
Well, and that was my next question too. If it happens, the building happens to be on a corner, you're talking about the frontage on the address side of the, on the frontage.
Corner
So
lots have two frontages.
Yeah, so it'd be total, or what would it, whichever
It would
one
be
is-
400, if it was like on the corner of High and Main Street, it would be 400 feet on High Street, 400 feet on Main Street.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I guess you'd probably end up seeing an L shape or just not end up having this 400 feet be binding on one of the two frontages, but that is an interesting question. I hadn't had that occur to me while we were thinking this through. But if it would be useful to anybody for understanding what really is at issue here, I've drawn up some little theoretical lots here. So here on the on Zoning Street, we'll call it, on the corner lot, we've got a vacant lot with the setback envelope in yellow and the buildable area in white, and that's of course ignoring other dimensional standards that may come into play. We're just looking at the frontage and the lot size here. This is presuming the RN 3600 or MU or another district with identical standards. But these lots that are empty are compliant in their minimum lot size and their setback envelopes. And then, for example, we have a detached home that's on a minimum sized lot entirely within the setback envelope, so it's compliant with that zoning. It has no trouble meeting the standards. We have a duplex here that is also slotted into that same size, 36 feet of frontage by 100 feet of depth. But we actually, as currently written in the previous language proposed for attached housing, we allowed for a 30-foot lot frontage. I think in an effort to allow for narrower lots for this housing type. So I've drawn that up here in the fifth area here. And in the rear of those homes, you can actually see a darker area of gray, which is excess land that would be required in order to actually meet the 3,600 square foot minimum with that narrower lot. So ultimately the outcome of trying to go for that narrower lot for attached housing, as we were proposing to allow it before this version that I've brought to you today, it would essentially require a longer lot with that sort of excess space in the back. And then we've got 3 empty lots here of 30 feet to illustrate the same principle. But it's actually a substantially more serious problem for rows of at least 3, which I've illustrated here with the 3 attached homes here. So we're allowing for units individually to be 18 feet in width, but we had it written prior that 30 feet was still the lowest lot frontage that would be allowed. So what I've colored in here in red is the portion of the 3rd unit that would be entirely on the wrong lot if it was built out to the minimum unit size, but subdivided to the minimum lot size. So we just don't have a match there in terms of the units that we're expecting and the lots that we're requiring. So if we were going to go with the scenario that I've actually proposed in the language that you've got in front of you, to allow for the minimum unit size of 18 feet plus any required minimum side setbacks, which results in 24 feet for end units and 18 for mid units or mid block units. If we remain with the 3,600 minimum square lot or minimum square feet minimum lot size, we get a whole lot of excess in the rear here, including this very interesting appendage on the mid-block lots. And I think what is worse than just the sort of extra yard that you might be required to have in a duplex, this is almost certainly unbuildable in effect. And so what we'd be doing, especially if you saw a frontage on a hypothetical street in the rear here with a similar type of subdivision, you'd be getting this sort of sawtooth arrangement that creates a lot of area that's dead by zoning but might otherwise be buildable, and I think that's certainly worth avoiding. So going by the actual proposed language that I've given you to allow for 24 feet minimum frontage for the end lots and 18 for the mid-block lots, plus essentially building out from whatever your actual units are. This is presuming that you have a already built block of attached housing, adding all required setbacks to that structure gets you your minimum lot size, and so it's tied directly to the built form of the house. And I've repeated the same subdivision adjacent to this without buildings on it, so that it's clear what the setback envelopes actually look like. So these lots are substantially smaller than what we would generally allow for, but it does ultimately relate specifically to the built form that we have. So in theory, we would also be able to consider, I haven't drawn it here, but you could see proposed attached housing that has a rear wall shared as well, and that would be able to have additional lots that are subdivided through the rear wall and the side walls, and still be able to meet this without otherwise having to carry far too much land. And particularly in that scenario, we could basically have unsubdividable structures because of our maximum front setbacks that we would require. So if you have a situation where you've got a shared rear wall and shared side walls, then the only way you can really get more land is in front. But we would otherwise prohibit that in many of our districts, and for good reason. So I think this is something that is probably incredibly dry, but I think is far more in tune to creating a good built form for this specific housing type. Can I get
Good presentation.
Helpful, yeah.
You got
Wow.
an apple at the end.
Yeah, thanks for putting all that work into making
Yeah.
this really clear.
E for effort. Yeah. I guess my question, goes back to Dan's question. I don't know if you want to change that to the building design. I was thinking of standard or requirement, maybe? I mean, is that a land use requirement that, with number 5, it says instead of building design, you could put standard or required standard or something like that?
I think it's consistent,
Right.
the terminology that we use is consistent.
I mean, being that's land use and land regs and all that, so, building reg maybe, or, because design.
I'd rather keep it consistent throughout the
Gotcha.
regulations, and when we talk about these things, we're usually talking about building design.
Gotcha, okay.
I
With
mean,
the
they are,
multi-
they're standards.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
I had another question related to fire, which is that my understanding is that part of the reason for building the height require, or, you know, maximums has to do with ladders, being able to, you know, ladder trucks and hose links and all of that. If we did have really long rows of attached housing, if we don't require that they be fronting on the building, maybe we could even go back to your example there, Steve, but if instead of running along the frontage of the street, they were running back, we would potentially have some units that wouldn't necessarily be accessible by fire equipment unless there was also some other provision for requiring access.
Yes.
Perhaps that's already addressed elsewhere, and it probably isn't necessarily our place anyway, but it just popped into my head of like, if we had units that were not oriented this way but oriented the other direction, they kind of continued on in a line, and there's kind of this little like path you take to get, you know, door to door to door. At some point, that house in the middle is hard to get to in any way.
Yeah, so we do have a process where major site plans, like a development like this, would go before the fire department would receive a copy of it. They'd have an opportunity to make comments. I agree. I think, you know, it's going to have to be, you know, it might have to be wider than a driveway, because it might be that a ladder truck has to set up and needs to get the outriggers out and that kind of thing. So, yeah,
There's
it
a process,
definitely
and
would.
we'll just
Yeah.
move along.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It seems that we don't currently have a standard specifically saying that within the 303A section. So my anticipation is either we totally dropped the ball on that and haven't noticed for, 8 years, which is, I guess, a good thing that it hasn't come up the hard way, or we do effectively get to it with the other, you know, driveway and performance standards. But was there something in the
It wasn't
drawing
actually related to this, it's just that I know that Burlington, Vermont is required for accessory dwelling units if they're located something like more than 40 feet from the property line, then they're required to be sprinkled. They're required to have sprinklers rather, so that, because they wouldn't necessarily be accessible by fire trucks. And that adds an additional cost that a lot of people don't anticipate, so they've been a lot more clear about that now, people know to expect that, et cetera, but 40 feet, I could be wrong that that's the distance, but it's not very far from the street, right? And this has the potential to kind of like go back and back and back, depending on how large a lot is.
Yeah, I think typically, at least in the sort of more mid-Atlantic style row houses, that is more or less what I've drawn here versus the New England style, where maybe we just turn that 90 degrees.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Oh, so there's
long and sort of shallow.
Oh, okay.
These, I've drawn these out to be 18 by 60, I think is what they ended up being, just going off of general average of moderately sized ones from cities that have a lot of row houses. So I think if you were gonna have two abutting rear to rear, you would end up with probably no more than 150 feet of structure, but yeah, if we had 150 by 400 as sort of a big box full of single units, then perhaps there could be bits in the middle that are hard to reach.
But as noted, since there is a process around this question can be brought up by the fire commission rather than us.
And maybe if there's still questions or concerns about that, people can do some homework outside this meeting to figure that out for sure. I'd like for us to vote on this, but if there's anything else pressing. Oh, he knows how to put up his hand and unmute.
Looks like he's just.
He's shaking it. All right.
He's there.
I'll move that we approve 303A attached housing as amended. But with that little change at the very end showing that the 400 feet means in frontage or building front line, whatever is
So
the
you're
appropriate
amending.
wording.
Okay.
Yep, we already spoke about that.
Oh.
Just bringing it up so it doesn't get lost. Is there a second?
Second.
No further discussion. Now's your chance. Have to do that. Robert's rules, I believe. Okay, all in favor? Raise your hand, please.
Aye. No public participation.
That's all four of us, great. Okay, moving on, this has been on our agendas a couple of past meetings. It's a request in the form of a letter from the Executive Director of Winston Prouty, and it's about our change to zoning for the Winston Prouty campus property. There's two documents in the folder. One is the letter. The other I just put in this morning, and it's I found it in a previous month's meeting, and it has the link to the zoning map. Maybe that'd be a good thing to put on the screen instead of the letter. Maybe we all can, know what the letter says already because we read it, or we can call it up on our own devices.
With them, this is a before and after comparison. Just to.
The ArcGIS link you're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brandy put that together for a previous month, I believe.
Yeah. It looks to be the same this way. But, oh no, it is.
So I think it's fair to say basically the main ask of the letter is that that lower, let's just call it half of the property, which as of right now, I guess we're on, in line to change that to, or it's been proposed to change that to rural residential. The Winston Prouty letter requests that it be changed to residential neighborhood. And there's reasons in the letter.
Right.
Thoughts? Comments? Questions? I have some. I'll let people go first.
How about you start us off?
Okay. Well, I'm not necessarily a stickler for, documents that we haven't published, but sometimes I am a little bit. I like to honor them somewhat. The town plan, our current town plan shows, it has this section called land use, and there's a subsection in that called future land use, because, it's the town plan, it's planning for the future. And it has pretty much the entire property in addition to more, but the whole Winston Prouty property is designated on that as rural residential. And so for the most part, our land use regs and the zoning is supposed to follow the town plan. To the extent that we, do it to every little detail and don't feel like we have any flexibility, that's another issue. But yeah, it has that whole as rural residential. And there's reasons for that, like, protecting the rural landscape and working lands and not having sprawl and not building out the municipal infrastructure, encouraging compact growth and smart growth principles. So we're already kind of going against that by making half of it mixed use for good reason. It's a dense built up, big buildings, campus area there in the Northeast. But in my mind, I like those priorities that the town plan has that I already listed off. There's some steep slopes in there too, I think. And if we change it to rural residential, I think the PUD conservation subdivision is allowed in rural residential, correct?
Yes.
Right, so there's already a path for having more dense housing than kind of just the 3 acre minimum that's allowed by the rural residential base zoning. There's trade-offs you have to do with the conservation subdivision, like build in a certain way or have the layout in a certain way of all the buildings and conserve 60% of the property at least and protect certain types of nature, prime ag lands or other types of ag lands too. So I feel like it's already, we should honor the plan and priorities and and principles that the plan talks about, and not go too far off the rails here. But there is, there could be something to be said for just allowing, if we want housing and we want to forget about a lot of our other priorities and principles, then we could just let a lot of districts be upzoned. But I think it's a balance that we should maintain.
I certainly appreciate the balancing act, and it also seems to me like this area both has a significant amount of infrastructure and has somebody interested in adding more, and also has proximity to downtown and the sorts of services that are provided by the neighborhood commercial district nearby, by the hospital, etc. So it seems like that balance is tricky, in that in some ways having the requirement that there be more open space here could potentially benefit a lot of people. And on the other hand, having this be a dense area of housing could make it a really livable place to be. There could be a lot of housing in this area in a way that it's hard to have a lot of housing that close in.
So I guess my question is, traffic-wise, how does that work?
So just specifically, I just want to, I think everyone understands, but specifically we're talking about, there's that kind of goldish orange color, and then below that, the one that Steve just highlighted.
Right.
And not to say that you don't understand that, but I just want to
No,
be clear.
it's good for even the
Yeah.
viewers to get educated on that.
Right. So for the upper one where the campus is, that's, at least it seems like we're going to be making that mixed use. So, that's 50 acres or so. That could be, pretty darn dense, with big buildings. And the town's water and sewer terminates currently there at that campus.
Right.
But then as far as going into all the forested area, that's just all, that's all raw land. But you can ask your question, and what about driving?
Well, between that, conservation-wise and all that and everything, eco, the whole nine, just saying, looking at how many housing units are going up there, and then, building that along with the DPW with sewage and all that, and with traffic and congestion coming in. You can see going into Winston Pratt around that turn. How would that work?
Well, that'll all be addressed within the infill housing.
Okay.
But I guess if you were to look at that southern portion of the property and upzoning that, I
Right.
mean, right now there's Maple Street access. Could you potentially get over to Dillon Road? Potentially.
I think the highway's back up that.
But, I mean, right now, they don't have control all the way to there, so,
Right.
it's no guarantee, so that could be a limitation of more dense development on that southern rural residential part of it. Also, in terms of the infrastructure, it is not there right now.
Right.
So that would be an extension, so,
Okay.
Tom is right.
Does it extend to the area where the squiggly line is, or just to the
Just to the buildings.
buildings? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know.
It is, there's a hill there. There's some wetlands there.
In the
There is an
back,
Act 250 permit on the property, and some of that is designated in their conservation areas as well, on the Act 250 permit for the campus, so. I could understand why they want more flexibility in that area. And I would say if the planning commission, chose not to make a change to the base zoning now, doesn't mean that in the future, if the infill project happens, that it couldn't be reconsidered at that time.
Yeah, they've said that they are planning on doing it in phases anyway, and starting with the campus. I see Dan's hand up, but if Steve, you wanted to directly address one of the things.
Yeah, I
Mark
think, food for thought on this. What we're seeing on the right-hand side is changing both halves of the property's base zoning district to something that's not currently in effect.
Yeah.
And while it might not be desirable or feasible, I'm wondering if the commission might be more interested, for the sake of the conservation of that parcel, if that's the prevailing goal. I think it's worth considering leaving the back half as institutional for the time being, as a way of having that master planning aspect still be in effect that currently impacts the parcel. Because rural residential, despite its purpose statement, is not actually a very effective tool for preserving rural areas. Essentially, there wouldn't be anything to stop other than slopes. 1.5 acre piecemeal subdivision of that, which I know is not their intent for that parcel in the future, but that would be essentially allowable by right within zoning if that goes to rural residential. So I know that leaving half of it as institutional, where there's not really anything built up, is a bit difficult, but I think bringing it into rural residential for that, because of that awkwardness, is actually probably subjecting it to more development pressure that doesn't fit either the goal of increased housing in a smart growth sense or effective conservation.
Well, institutional has a minimum lot size of half an acre. You know, single-family houses aren't permitted, but they're conditional.
Right. So that would still be, I would think, a far more restrictive and discretionary type of review on any kind of
Yeah. Because of the conditional.
development, because of that master planning aspect of the institutional zone.
Oh, there's something in the IT district chapter section that says, oh, master plan required. I see that. I haven't reviewed this much. Oh,
Got Dan's hand up.
yeah. Dan?
Thanks. I just wonder, I understand that we could sort of delay or give a path forward for future changes, but I do wonder what the downside of making the change now as requested would be. I mean, it seems like the upside on the developer's side would be, having a clear designation now. I understand it might not be needed right now, but the residential neighborhood designation being sort of in place would allow the plan that they make to be more concrete, I would think. I just don't know what the downside of doing it now versus.
So the current plan that they're working on is only about infill housing on the existing campus. It doesn't deal with the entirety of the property. They've had some student work that kind of, showed what potentially is possible, but it's not the master plan that they're working on.
Right, but what would be the downside of essentially, and by the way, I wonder, was Chloe invited to this meeting?
No, I didn't remind her that it was being discussed at this meeting.
Okay.
So
I mean, I think it'd be worth having a discussion with her, but, that's just my 2 cents, because I think it's pretty clear from her letter that, for their planning purposes, it would be helpful to them to make the change now.
Well, so Sue's on the board, right?
No, I'm not on her board.
It's not the board, but what's the group called?
I did some of the campus planning with them. So
Regarding this housing plan, right? And
early before they hired a consultant to do the master
So you're
plan,
kind of
just some
yeah.
conversations about possibilities. And
I just bring that up because Sue is close, well, not as close as I thought, but to this project, and I don't think Chloe knows a lot about zoning. I don't really know. But so I think Sue has.
Yeah,
like a
I
sense
mean,
of-
I'm sure that she's writing the letter, but
Right.
based on whatever, based on whatever has been,
So their consultant reviewed what we had been working on. The firm that's doing the master plan had looked at what our proposed zoning was and wanted to give this feedback. I think from their perspective, they don't want to, they want it to be easier to develop whatever part of the campus, they just would like to, it's not their intent to do that southern part now. I don't think they want to foreclose opportunities in the future. At the same time as being good stewards of land. And they probably see it easier to do that with the RN 36, small lots, smaller setbacks. What's the trade-off of making that at this point? Well, potentially extending infrastructure before it's ready. What if they have a developer that's more interested in developing that part of the campus rather than the infill, then they're gonna extend the infrastructure. Things like that.
so the downside would be wasting money on something that's not potentially gonna be used. I mean, okay, that's definitely something to be, considered. I just think if you're trying to provide an incentive for this thing to get off the ground, I suppose, it would, well, first of all, it would be nice to hear from, I think we've heard from Chloe in the past anyway, but, it would be nice at this point to discuss this piece, but it seems from her letter that it, from their perspective, would be, it would help them incentivize the project, essentially, right? I guess. So,
Well, not just incentivize, but potentially allow like a greater
Yeah.
density in building size than would otherwise be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we did take their plans into consideration in the more northern and moving that from institutional to mixed use. To kind of help with that phase. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would say we're gonna talk a little bit about the schedule that I'd like to see in moving this forward, and so we can definitely invite, there's still time to make changes, we could leave it as is, take testimony, make a change before we send it on to the select board.
So this was a collaborative effort with you, and I did see something in
This
regards to
letter, you're
that.
saying?
Yeah.
Well, not with the letter, but with, the proposal that they worked before, I think the select board at one point, Chloe's.
No,
board.
that's the work that they're doing. They
Okay,
had a kind of a campus planning group that were giving them
Right.
some advice, and people from BDCC, Wyndham Regional Commission, myself.
oh, okay, she did ask for if anyone had any feedback and work, I guess,
Yeah,
with her too. I was just wondering who else was involved in that process. And if, like Dan said, if possible down the road, they can, or maybe we can chime in on one of their Zoom meetings, just to get an idea of, probably what it is their focus is and what they're doing, where they're gonna go and where they're at, so that way you have an idea of the direction,
Yeah, it'd be good to know if there's been updates
Yeah.
besides that thing they presented to the select board several months ago.
their master plan is further along, but they
Yeah.
don't have a developer.
Who was that? Maybe that was Sue, who was just doubled over. Was that you,
Yeah,
Dick?
I think that was my computer, yeah, sorry, it notes
It's an
every.
AI, it's a lot.
Was that the little paperclip guy of Microsoft Word 2000, 1995?
It's alive, Dan.
I just want to add, I brought up conservation subdivision and how that's a PUD that's allowed in rural residential district.
Mhm.
And I had in my head the thought, oh, maybe that only allows single-family housing, but I'm reading and it says, oh shoot, where'd it go? All forms of residential use and buildings will be permitted within a conservation subdivision except for multifamily with 5 or more dwelling units. So it allows for 4 and under and attached housing, as long as one meets the conservation-minded, trade-offs of the PUD. Anyway, I bring that up again because that's kind of what I'm leaning towards and in favor of keeping it rural residential. But, and we'll hear from Steve, and I'd like to not necessarily go right to a vote after Steve, but keep in mind the time. Steve?
Just a sort of food for thought that I'd love to hear takes from the commission on. In the scenario where we're seeing hypothetically the southern half being rezoned as rural or as residential neighborhood rather than rural residential, I'm wondering if there would be interest in rather just seeing the entire parcel being mixed use, to avoid splitting a parcel into two zoning districts, and frankly not really getting any, I don't think having the back half be rural resident, or be residential neighborhood, excuse me, is actually really in keeping with the purpose of the RN district, and I could easily see how it also wouldn't necessarily be in keeping with the mixed use district either, but it seems like, would we really be getting the kind of development that they're wanting to see, that is, compact and dense with the RN versus allowing for the MU to cover the entire parcel? I mean, it would be the same lot size minimum and the same dimensional standards for setbacks, but it would have a different sort of perspective, and I think it would probably be more in keeping with what they're wanting to do, if in the event that this was actually something that we wanted to see enabled.
I don't think it's in keeping with what they want to do. I think everything I've seen, the visioning was residential only. I also think we need to be careful with it. There's a lot of, community use of the open space on that property.
That's true.
So.
Doesn't the farmer's market utilize that as well?
Well, in one of
No.
the buildings.
So
Yeah, the main
okay.
campus and the mixed use portion, but the back has trails and
Yes. Wetland.
ropes course, wetlands, slopes, some nice.
I don't know how we would craft a motion here, because we have, if we wanted to consider all the options that have been brought up. I mean, that's not how a motion has to be crafted. Someone could just come up with a proposal. But I'll run through what I've heard. It's, what staff and Place Sense, I think together came up with mixed use for the top half and rural residential for the bottom. The letter is requesting the bottom be rural residential neighborhood, but actually the denser type, 3,600. And Steve brought up putting the bottom half as institutional, and he brought up making it all mixed use, but there was kind of staff disagreement about that. I don't know, what could we do? Someone could make a motion, or we could go around to all four and say how we're leaning. Also keeping in mind that although we're voting on this, we're actually going to make the final decision at the end of a public hearing. So we'll hear from the public, and then we will bat things around if we want to, and make changes again.
I would think a little bit more info, I guess, from what we were speaking before about, the other people that are involved, to get more feedback, just to get an idea and, digest that, and then we can come to a better idea. Because, when's the deadline, I guess? When has to happen?
Well, we can move our process forward and leave it as is, and just ask them to make a better case, basically, in more polite terms.
Well, that's feasible.
I don't feel like I'm ready to make any decisions about this because I've actually never been there. So I think I need to do that field trip. Need to understand how it's currently being used. Need to understand what it is they're proposing.
Okay.
Yeah, nature walk.
Well, with two of us not voting, two people, even if Dan and I do vote, two isn't going to come to any, it's not going to come to any legal decision. So I think we can wrap it up. But Dan wants to say something.
Yeah, I would agree with the prior comments. I also think we should have Chloe attend if possible, that would be good. So I would say I wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward with this either.
Okay.
Site survey.
Great. Not deciding is a form of deciding.
Decisive.
But we'll have our public hearing, and she can be there, or the consultant or whoever. Okay, moving on to, a bit behind here, but moving on to the three, well, I don't think the residential neighborhood utility standards, doc made it in.
No, I'll talk to that when it's time.
Okay. But we have two here, one about the rooming house use being added to rural residential, rural, and waterfront, and potentially altered in how it is in the use table of residential neighborhood. Steve made up a good clear visual memo for that with an explanation. I don't think we have to spend much time giving context unless people have questions or wondering where this came from or if anything's unclear.
It looks like there were decisions to be made
Right.
in terms of whether we're going to place it in permitted or conditional use within each of these
Right.
zoning.
Yeah, but before we maybe walk through each of those four districts, I mean, if there's anybody really needs some clarity, I think the memo spelled things out pretty well.
Mhm.
But that's just me.
I don't know if anybody in the public might have questions.
The camera person is I would permit them to speak.
Absolutely.
Or anybody listening in at home, calling quick.
Chime in.
Okay, but I guess we'll just go through them. So we'll start with the residential neighborhood, I think, which is the very end. Because currently rooming/boarding house is allowed as in all developed districts, except in this one, it's conditional. But I think as Steve said in the memo, it's, well, anyway, there's different ways you could view it, but it takes the form of a single-family house, but it could presumably have more occupants in the house than a typical single-family house. But what do folks think? Leaving it conditional or moving it to permitted or something else?
I see something yellow on there. What's that highlighted?
Well, it's just highlighting the rooming or boarding house
Oh,
Yeah,
use.
that was unintentional. I think I still had my control app down when I took that screenshot. I think I'll just flag
Oh, sure.
so that we don't read the whole first page, which you're more than welcome to do at your leisure. There is a limit on the number of adults who could actually be living in this type of development, aside from, of course, the actual family of the owner or resident who runs this type of dwelling. And that would be 6 rooms with 2 adults, so you effectively have 6 units of housing in addition to the person who runs this, which is more or less in keeping with the way that it's obviously one more than we would have be permitted if it was a standalone multifamily unit or multifamily project, but we do allow for existing structures to be redeveloped into 6 in this case or greater multifamily, and so that's effectively what we would be seeing in existing structures. I could see a situation where it's viable to add that same kind of distinction where a new construction rooming and boarding house could be left as conditional, but I don't really think that's really worth splitting hairs on. But just worth keeping in mind that there is a relatively hard limit on how big these can get.
Right, yep. Yeah, and the residential neighborhood district is watered and sewered, with the infrastructure, so it's not this, anyway. Yeah, the form takes the shape of a single-family house, so, there can be, at least form-wise, it wouldn't look out of place.
think I'd be inclined to go with option 1 for the residential neighborhood.
Is that your motion?
Yes.
I second it.
Dan?
But we can have more discussion if people need to before voting on that.
We'll switch it up and see if Dan has any questions.
Well, that's what I'm asking for right now.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that. Yeah.
Okay. So all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
That's all 4 of us. Great. So then moving on to, let's just move one up to the waterfront district.
District.
Currently, rooming / boarding house is not either permitted or conditional. As you all know, not much of the town is actually waterfront district. Certainly when you remove town-owned properties, but there are currently some properties, right? You know, they're privately owned and do have residential on them. It's not many, but, and almost all of those are watered and sewered as well, right? Would you say? You know, along the Whetstone and
A little bit along
the ones that aren't owned by the town or the retreat.
Marina, those areas.
Or the industrial area, yeah, they're watered and sewered too, for the most part.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
There are some that may not be, but.
Yeah, sporadically, yeah. So what are people's thoughts there?
Yeah. He's thinking, I can smell that smoke. It's working. Yeah.
There's already quite a few residential uses, I mean, pretty much all of them, right, that are either permitted or conditional. Presumably, you know, a rooming house in some situations has more occupants that were so-called units than a lot of these, but they're often single people and in small, you know, just individual bedrooms sharing an area. And once again, the structure takes the form of a single-family house.
I have no further discussion.
Does staff have a recommendation?
I think having it being permitted seems fine.
Right.
You know, if there was interest in seeing what the breakdown was for the water and sewer question on waterfront properties, we could certainly do that, but I think it's.
Sure it matters. I mean, it's 6, you know, you get a septic system that's big enough or you're not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, right. So, I mean, you would be in the same situation if you had a very large family in a single-family house
Right.
with multiple bathrooms, and you needed a wastewater permit.
Yeah, and maybe low-income, single living people should have the same residential access to the waterfront as other people do, so I'll throw in that.
That's true. There's town plan call-outs that could be made.
Yeah.
In regards to that.
Are we talking along the Connecticut River this way?
I think the only part that's the district that
Little bit
has the
up.
waterfront district there is down in the southeast area, and it's
Little
not
bit
really
up Depot
buildable.
Street.
Yeah,
Do
down.
we have a Google map?
Oh, a little on Bridge Street there.
Steve, of that?
Well, here it is.
So
Right here.
I guess we can go with the.
So all the really bright or royal
Yeah.
blue or something is waterfront.
Yeah, so much of what we're seeing here along the Whetstone is not
It's not
something we're
buildable.
gonna see. Obviously, living Memorial is not gonna.
Town owned.
There's some private up on Western Ave, like the farmer's market. They're kind of flood constrained a little bit. There's Depot Street.
Right. And then there are some parcels along.
This is
Oh,
not all water and sewer down here.
Yeah, I think some of the very beginning has access from last I checked, but the parcels at the end of this lobe here probably don't. But they're also flood constrained to a substantial degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's very much of any
No.
residential currently, but
No,
yet,
there's-
you know, but we permit it, or at least have, you know, allow that conditionally, just in case things change, or on the one-off property,
Hey,
every so
Route
often that
30,
may.
Doesn't he have a little, Route 30 has?
Yeah, they showed it there.
I couldn't, I was trying to get the
Yeah.
satellite view.
Mhm.
Did we pay for that?
I move that we move forward with option 1 for waterfront use.
Okay, to make rooming and boarding house permitted.
I second that.
Gary seconds
There
it.
you go.
If there's no discussion, pause, then let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye. Is Dan
That's the
stuck?
three of us.
Oh, I thought Dan
Okay.
froze.
Well, he's welcome to vote a different way
He's
too.
alive, yes.
Great, so all four of us passed
Yes.
that. Now there's well, let's skip one, because, well, there's rural moving up, but rural residential is a little bit less rural. You know, it's a little more upzoned than rural, so let's go there. Rural residential. We have the same, the same format of decision here. But rural residential, I think almost entirely is not watered and sewered, and
Triplexes and quads are not currently allowed
mhm.
in rural residential, so this would be a little bit different in terms of density, but,
They are conditional. If we
right,
look at the-
sorry,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, no worries.
Not permitted, yes.
You said but.
I was just to say, but the form probably would be fairly in keeping with some other rural residential uses in terms of larger buildings and multiple people and so forth, so I don't see any reason it wouldn't be a possibility. I think it'd be less likely to be built here, but I don't see any reason not to. Somebody thinks they can make it work.
Yep. I feel similar. So I'll move that we choose option 1, that rooming and boarding house be added to the rural residential use table as permitted.
Second?
Gary seconds. Any discussion about that? Because I'm kind of moving things along quickly. Yeah, Dan?
Just a quick question, maybe for Sue or Steve. So with a obvious situation where your septic systems and water supplies, I think maybe the water supply is more the well situation is more of a concern to supply enough water for X number of people. What kind of review would there be at the permit stage for that if this actually came to fruition?
So
Period.
all we would do, it's done by the state, both on-site septic and on-site water wells. So that we would basically say you need to go get your state permit.
Right, but the permit would be for whatever size house it is, not,
I believe the permit actually goes by bedroom.
It goes by bedroom for
Right.
septic for sure. I'm not sure about
Okay.
water.
And then I think there's something in those DEC water and wastewater rules that is saying, if you add bedrooms, then you need to
Yeah.
update your permit.
Mhm.
To the extent people do that, in enforcement, that's another matter, but that's true for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so in some ways, rooming house is the most, fits better those wastewater rules than the other, because a single-family house could have one person in it, or it could have 12 people.
The
But-
only thing I'm not sure about, Tom, is the water rules. I don't know if you're serving a certain number of people, if all of a sudden it becomes like a community system.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, it's different to have 2 adults per room rather than like 1 child per room or whatever, or 2 adults and 4 children or whatever the size of the house is. I'm just saying, if you had like a 6-bedroom house, let's say, that, okay, it makes sense to be a rooming house, you're then talking about 12 adults rather, potentially 12 adults, for example. And then you're gonna tax, if it's not a well, if it's not a adequate well. But I'm just curious what the requirements would be if they were to try to get a permit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still fine, I guess, if they need to drill a new well or something. But that just kind of, that raises the question of, it raises other questions of, a certain site that would be adequate, that would be able to supply parking for potentially 12 cars, let's say, at one house, or, something like that. I'm just speculating, but I don't know if it is, I just don't know if it's necessary to go all the way to option 1 myself. I just don't know.
So Dan, you'd be inclined to do option 2 for this one?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it seems fine to be conditional use because, then you have maybe a little more consideration going into whether or not to do it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not against it entirely, but it seems like a lot to put on someone, a lot to promise maybe, not a promise, but, to sort of expect that's really doable. Just a thought.
One point of clarity, I think the way that we're proposing to harmonize the parking requirements with, why am I blank, SRO, it would only be one space per room. So you might have effectively, half of the adults wouldn't be required to have parking. Not that that makes it much different, frankly, to have, say 6, 7 cars versus 12, but just for reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just would change, you'd have to make it, as opposed to, let's say, something closer to town, it would put a lot of burden on the person trying to do that. Let's say someone were planning to purchase a property thinking that they could do that relatively easily, make an SRO, it would be a very special property, I think, that could, absorb that much. Without a new well and a new septic system, I would just imagine, really. But, I suppose it's possible.
For the permitted use single-family attached dwelling in rural residential, how many does that max out at, hypothetically?
The density provision for the size of the
right.
lot, I think, and then probably also Act 250 would come into play at, I guess, 10
units.
But I mean, I'm noticing golf course as well, so if we want to talk about overtaxing a well.
Well, they have deep pockets to put as many wells as they want.
There you go.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know, it's just, it would invite more problems than you might want to invite, but that's just kind of, there may be that special property out there with a beautiful well and, it's ready to go.
We have bed and breakfasts, though, in the rural parts of town.
Yeah, but that's not daily, that's not every day. I mean, when we have droughts, we do have well issues all around, and if you did, then you'd run out. That's what I'm getting at. I mean, you'd run out of water, with like whatever number of adults, But, that's, again, it's maybe neither here nor there, but I think putting a little bit of an extra caution, I don't know if it is a caution really, but, less of a open door to it maybe is what I would suggest.
To what Dan was just saying, and for reference, the bed and breakfast is actually under conditional at the moment. I don't know if that changes anyone's.
Do you want to formulate that into a motion, Dan, or does someone else want to feel inspired?
Well, we have a motion.
Oh, we do?
Oh, yeah, the
Yeah,
first
you-
one.
Oh, I made it?
You moved to make it permitted,
Yeah.
Gary seconded it.
Oh,
This was just discussion.
You want to amend that, or?
all of these back to backs.
Ratify?
Well, no, let's just go with that and see. So we'll need 4.
You need,
We'll need all
You
4 in
need
favor to
You
make
need
it
all
happen.
4.
So let's just see, all in favor of putting it under permitted? Raise your hand, please. That's just 2. Okay, it fails. Is there another motion?
I'll make a motion to go for option 2.
Okay.
However,
Your second?
I'll second that.
Lina seconds. Please, let's not have discussion, because we already did. All in favor? Raise your hand, please. That's all 4 of us, great. Let's try to wrap up here with the rural use table.
If we we can probably guess.
Yeah.
Similar considerations. We can have discussion, but let's just have the motion and do discussion right after if needed.
I move that we make rooming and boarding houses a conditional use in the rural use district.
Great, I second it. Any discussion, refinements of previous comments for this more rural district? No? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. That's Dan, myself. Oh, Linda's hand's up, and Gary. Okay, great. So we're done with that item. Let's move on to considering freestand. Is there a distinction between freestanding and detached? Are they pretty much synonymous words? In
I
your
don't
mind?
know.
Okay. Great.
I
So
think for the purposes of tonight,
yeah, they're the same.
they're the
Okay.
same.
Yeah, let's not complicate this. Yeah, so I was looking at the definition of bedrooms, and it just seems to say bedrooms can only be attached and a part of and inside a dwelling unit. I thought, there could be creative situations where a bedroom could be separate,
Right.
and people just walk down a 10-foot, 20-foot path to use the bathroom and use the kitchen and watch TV or whatever in the main place. And yeah, you have to put on a jacket, but I don't see that should be banned. So staff came up with a creative solution, because just changing the definition or proposing to change the definition didn't seem to fly in their minds. I wrote a little context description of that. Hopefully you all saw that. And what they came up with was adding some wording to the accessory uses and structure figure.
And the 10-second version of this is the definition of bedroom that we use is coming from state statutes, so
Yeah.
making alterations to that is just a non-starter. And then for the possibility of this being a backdoor for substandard housing, I think it's not really an issue the way that we've particularly phrased this here, because rental code would not allow for a detached bedroom with no independent sanitation facilities to actually be rented out. So this would need to be within the same household and not a rental arrangement.
Would it be possible to have a bathroom within this detached living space, bedroom and bathroom, like an ensuite basically?
Sure, I think that would just become I think that would be able to be an ADU or a,
But it wouldn't be an ADU
If it doesn't have
if
a
it doesn't have
kitchen.
a kitchen.
Mm.
The reason I
Yeah.
ask is that in Portland, we're granted the climate is considerably different, but there are extended family situations where there is a detached bedroom with an ensuite bath that works really well for an extended family situation where people are sharing meals together. So there's no need for a kitchen, but it's nice to not have to go into the house for a bathroom in the middle of the night. And I think that's especially true in a place where we get, negative numbers in the climate. So I think as long as we can have that be a possibility, I think this is a fantastic idea and I love it.
Yeah, this does not prohibit bathrooms.
I also want to say that Tom brought this up as a concern. We actually have situations where we have permitted detached living spaces, so we did not see this really as an issue. But, down the road when different people are interpreting the land use regulations.
So it sounds like
But exactly that, it was kind of a tiny home situation, and we just said you can't have a kitchen, but you can have the bedroom and the bath.
So it sounds like it already exists. This would just be providing language to say it can be done.
Dan?
Yeah, would this apply to a yurt as well?
I would think so.
Yeah.
If the yurt
Yeah,
can meet
I mean,
the
we have yurts
requirements.
already as accessory dwelling units, so yes.
Yeah, I think yurt is possibly in this
No.
particular, it's written at least once in this document overall. I thought it was within this table, but yeah, I think it's not specific to the kind of built form, other than, of course, the square footage.
What is it in Brattleboro that makes a kitchen? Is it having an oven?
A little warmer.
Cooktops,
Yeah, is it the range top or oven?
Yeah, I think
Microwave.
so.
Isn't that what, I think you had come up with that language the other
When we were
meeting,
talking about it for the,
but that may have been specific to us
I'm
already.
not sure if we're specific that it's an oven.
okay,
It might just say cooking facilities or something.
okay.
Yeah.
Likely, we're just quoting some level of building code or state
Sure.
code that
Mhm.
supersedes our ability to sort of pick at this.
One thing I would say with this detached living space, and I didn't get a chance to go back to it, but we have talked about, we are making the change to exempt accessory structures that are less than 100 square feet. This is precisely where, if it, all of a sudden it has a bathroom,
Mhm.
that the assessors are going to see value and will probably want to tax it. So
Mm.
it might force us to take a look at that language and be clear that it's a shed and not something.
It says not
that's-
used for human
Yeah.
habitation in the
All right.
exemption,
Yeah.
right?
So I didn't look back at it today,
We,
so,
we even saw the non-farm animals thing
Yeah.
before it
yeah.
became a
Okay.
problem, so I think we definitely exempted
Okay,
humans.
I think Dan's hand is just up from before, but if not,
No, it's a new one.
Oh, okay.
Got a minute.
Go
Yeah, I see these are changes, but all this, the pieces that are rear or side, rear or side, rear or side.
mhm.
I understand that's, frontage issue, but is that taking into consideration, rear, let's say, relative to the road, right? But
Yes.
if the house is oriented, let's say diagonally or actually oriented, sort of, along the road, is that a clear definition? I'm just really curious, like, what's
Well,
rear or
well,
side?
Do you remember, in the visual, the SketchUp that Steve put up, how it showed blocked off in yellow,
Mhm.
all of the, so basically you would just take like that 5 foot.
Right, but that's, I'm just saying, so rear or side is relative to the frontage, right?
Yeah.
yes.
Correct? Yeah, okay.
So
And
like,
it's, there's a graphic in a part of the land use regs that explains the rear setback, the side setbacks, what to
Okay.
do if there's a double frontage.
yeah, so like in the example that Tom was saying, you can see how these two lots that are the same frontage, same depth, and same size have a slightly different setback on this particular side that's
Right.
oriented to the left, the way we're looking at it, because this one has 2 front setbacks.
Right. But in that case, rear or side means relative to either frontage, perhaps.
I think on that corner lot, there's no rear.
Right,
Right.
there's 2 fronts and 2 sides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we make a decision on this one? All right.
Dan's hand
Well, this time I think his hand's up from before.
up.
Yeah.
Thought I was making a decision there.
So I'll move that we accept and approve the change to figure 3.1 as presented there.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? So 3 here. Dan, would you like to say
No.
something?
Actually, I do wonder if we could put yurts into the table. That's kind of just my,
Huh.
That's not a bad idea.
not necessary, I guess it's fine, but.
You inject that in there, yurts.
In this specific heading,
If it's not necessary, then that's fine. I just, just was wondering.
Well, I think Sue brought up that we don't talk about the type and materials of structure used for anything else. I mean, we'd have to get into teepee and log cabin and plank house and thatch house and.
Oh, well, I guess I only am going on hearsay really that yurts have been,
Popular,
Yes.
yeah.
tents or whatever, and just the idea that they're temporary, versus permanent.
we have
that-
permitted yurts as single-family homes in the past, and I do recognize that this specific heading has a 200 square foot cap and a 15-foot height limit, but we have had, I think, a 900 square foot yurt, if not multiple structures of that sort of size, at least in my time here, that have been permitted in the same way as a traditional construction single-family home would be.
So in this case, the use then as a single-family home would be what was governed by zoning, and the construction of it would be governed by building code.
Right. Although if it's a single-family home, I think there's considerable amount of leeway.
Okay, can we get back to the vote for the motion? To accept the changes to figure 3.1 as presented there? All in favor? That's the three of us here. And Dan's in favor too. Great. So we're definitely behind schedule here. Can the residential neighborhood utility standards be?
Nope,
addressed?
nothing can be pushed off, but I can tell you about that briefly. It's
Okay.
basically, it's off the table. So,
Oh.
when Brian proposed it, he thought there were a couple of areas, that were currently zoned RR, rural residential, that were gonna be upzoned to RN.
Mhm.
Because we had talked about kind of an area on Old Guilford Road, across from the Vermont Agricultural Business Center. There's a large parcel there, and we had talked about, where's the other parcel? Gosh,
Maybe on Guilford Street or near
there was another,
Town Chalet. Or
yeah,
There-
yeah. There was
are a
another
few
area we had
areas-
talked about that we thought would be appropriate for upzoning, and not really sure what happened there, but those didn't really get discussed.
Mhm.
So, anyway, if you wanna revisit those areas, we can pop up the map, or we can, kind of wait and hear what kind of testimony we get in public hearings. But for now, there's no language to discuss.
Sounds simple to me.
On that, I think Brandy had said, and pardon me if you already mentioned this, Brandy had described it in a certain way where it seemed unnecessary, even in the event that we did upzone some of those. And I think Sue and I were both fully satisfied with that explanation.
Okay. Okay, if there's no questions, comments about that, then we have, looking at our agenda, two more things of substance here, but we're definitely behind. Talking about the bylaw modernization grants next steps.
Right.
But then also the agenda item, of which we have a member of the public specifically here for, to offer some thoughts. But just about, because we've been, so which one should we do? What are people's thoughts? I mean, I'm kind of in control of the agenda as a chair, but should we try to cram both in? Or should we skip, since we have a member of the public here, skip over?
I'm just curious about the timeline. Is there just a decision that needs to be made about whether we have an additional meeting on the 15th of May?
Yeah,
Oh,
Where'd you
If
get
that's
that
the case.
timeline?
I put it in the.
oh, she,
We're
oh, I
gonna
didn't
pop it
see
up.
that,
Oh,
that's
okay.
what that was.
We're gonna pop it up on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay.
that's what it was.
Yeah, so, well, we're nearing the end of the work. If we could address this, because it's kind of.
Okay, yeah,
important to
this is-
It
to our
seems
work.
like it's timely and it hopefully won't be too time consuming.
Okay.
Right.
That sounds good to me. Let's go
So,
with that.
I proposed 2 adoption timelines if the planning commission was willing to have a second meeting in May, like a quick one. We have these new amendments, we'll send them off to Brandy, we're gonna have the full document. We have a report that is just about complete. If we get together on the 15th and we see both those things and the planning commission signs off on them, we could hold our first public hearing, a planning commission public hearing at the June 5th meeting. And then, we could make changes or do whatever and then pass it along to the select board with them. And I say this tentatively because they schedule their meetings, but we could look at July 18th and August 1st for planning commission public hearings on land use regs. The reason I have it July 18th is because July 4th is a holiday and that's their first Tuesday, so I don't know what they're gonna do there. Or sorry, August 1st would be the second one. where they could then potentially adopt it that night, if everything went smoothly. If we wanted to review the big final document and approve the planning commission report in June, then we could hold our first public hearing at our July meeting. And then kind of go through steps so that hopefully by the end of August, the select board would be able to get to adoption if everything went smoothly.
My guess is July 3rd might be a tricky time for not only us, but the public. So I'm
this is
inclined
true.
towards the earlier timeline, moving things forward, and I have availability on the 15th of May. So I would propose we all take a look at our calendars,
That's
see if
what
we
I'm
can
doing.
make a meeting happen on May 15th, and if so,
It's
then we have it.
15th, you said?
And we're not, and I'm talking, it could be a half an hour meeting, 45 minute, it doesn't have to be a 2-hour meeting.
Yeah, right, just depends on how, on our comments that, and thoughts and any changes.
I think
that
you can
we-
expect that Sarah would not be available.
Right.
I think she'll have a,
I would second the 15th, because come that time in June, on the town calendar I'm looking at also too.
the other thing with July is that we potentially have
Yeah.
we have new planning commissioners, so that's a little awkward to have a,
Oh, okay.
Right, so we can
Public
wrap
Yeah,
it up in
to
May.
catch them up to speed somehow.
Right, so,
15th looks good for you, Gary?
15th is applicable.
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
willing
same,
to do-
same for me. How about you, Dan?
I can give you a maybe. It's a really busy week. But it really, I think I like the idea of it being a short meeting. Is it,
So it'd be 6
Yeah.
PM? Yeah. So we have to
Yeah.
check in with Todd.
you'll have the materials in advance, so it could be,
Could we place it as a hold on our calendars for now, check in with Todd if he's available, then we have it, otherwise we wouldn't have quorum and we'd have to go with the longer timeline anyhow.
So be tentative then for that 15th date.
Well, that's what we're aiming for, I think, right?
Yeah.
But if it can't happen, then try to find another day
okay.
sooner around there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, Great, a nice visual timeline is a good way of
We didn't have to
Getting
do
the
a
point across, yeah.
Survey monkey on that.
Anything else to say about the bylaw modernization grant? Any any additional public outreach needed, or? I think the regular process.
No, I mean, we'll do the regular process. I'll probably write some stuff up, have maybe, not coffee with a cop, because I'm not a cop, but,
Mhm.
some sort of kind of open
Hmm,
office, maybe
yeah,
do some outreach.
and the accessory commercial units proposal will just be
Mhm.
part of this?
Mhm.
Okay.
Prosecco with the planner.
Prosecco with a planner.
Sweets
Like
with
it.
soup. All right, great. I'm glad that we got through that one quickly and pretty concretely. Moving on to what we've titled Looking Ahead. It's basically just, we've been focusing on housing and land use regs quite a bit. I don't know, for months or a year or something. Predominantly those things, but, the commission could focus on other things. We could, I remember we used to talk about the brownfields grant that the town had, and you came to us for comments, and there's other, the town typically every 8 years or so focuses on the town plan, and we're not quite there yet for that deadline, but that's another thing. And there's capacity studies, and we do municipal planning grants every year if we get the grants, and we usually do, so we're good applications. There's potentially other powers and projects and responsibilities, or other sections of the land use regs that we haven't been focusing on. But that's just kind of my little starter for this agenda item. We all saw Spoon Agave's letter provided to us. But commissioners can go first, or someone, or we can have Spoon lead us off, but maybe.
I guess, do we have anything else that was, basically put on the back burner, as they say, or a table at any point that we needed to get back with, signage and other stuff that we were doing previously before that?
Well, I certainly have some land use reg
Okay.
thing, like the historic resource
Right.
overlay, and then the, we talked about green zoning, and maybe how we might want to look at that, or the parking section.
Yes. That's what it was. And also with the, like you said, the brownfield, because there was some information that did come out. I'd like to get some more information on that, and that way you guys can have that for the new,
I have that information, you know.
oh.
Kind of one of my,
Sue, can you think of anything to Gary's question about things put on the back
put on the
burner?
background, your list is exactly what I would say.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
Historic Resource Overlay District and,
Uh-oh.
I wonder why I was going dark. Okay.
let's see if it works, because it didn't work for publication. Thank you.
We had a few projects
Historic
in the summer.
resource overlay and what we've designated as our historic districts has been a little bit of, it has been something that we've been wanting to look at, that the design review committee has encouraged, you know, that we look at. Gosh, I might lose this meeting. This is what I was having a problem
Yeah,
with.
if you co-host me.
You are the co-host, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, if you go offline when you're host, he'll take over and this will still be
Okay,
up if
this will
you
just
Oh,
go,
okay.
okay. Yeah, parking reform, I know, I think Sarah had interest in that as well,
Mhm.
and use of the green zoning. So most of my list would be
Land use
land use
reg.
regulations.
Okay. I think there was one more.
And then before I was the chair, I remember there used to be quite a bit more, well, I pretty much haven't had any, but like guests to come and just like present on things, which I'm not opposed to by rule, but it just feels like in general, we just have 2 hours once a month and there's plenty of things we can make decisions on, and that felt a little bit like things that people can do on their own time, you know,
Mhm.
learning and conversing with others. But if the commission felt like they wanted more of that, then I suppose myself or the next chair could be persuaded, you know.
I know mention that Steve brought up also too, for current and for new members, getting out doing your walks, I guess in the summers, organizing places that we didn't finish, that we were looking into up on Putney Road or on West B, you know, for housing and all that. I try to remember, I have to look back in the archives, back in the minutes where we left off at that, and then we were gonna pick it up with winter, it was getting cold. We went to some walks with Brandy too that time, it was great. Maybe that's something you could resurrect and get going again on that also. Some other prospects in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, there could be something to be said about, you know, instead of, you know, commissioners, especially new commissioners, just leaving it to them to just all, you know, learn the job on the go, but
Yeah.
actually do some more, figure out ways to get people up to speed or educate them more effectively.
I think you
And
agree
perhaps
with
that could be one way, but I'm not sure.
about doing site, you agree with that site, that would, and sometimes you don't have to wait on Steve, you could just go out yourself, like we did, and, you
As
know.
long as you don't have a quorum.
As long as you have a quorum, two by
With
two
discussion.
only. You know, and just pretty much map out and bring it back, you know, to the committee, and maybe they can all come together and look more into that also. And then down the road, as far as with Winston project, that's another thing that can be, to be continued or to be determined when it's ready, as Sue said.
Can I do a quick timeout? I got lost. What are we talking about right now?
Yeah, well, there's not necessarily like a vote or decision that needs to happen, but this, remember some months ago, maybe this was before you came on the commission, but
Yeah.
we put at the end of the meetings, sometimes like, what do people want to work on next times, you know, in future meetings? This is kind of that, but also just like, we're entering a new chapter sort of, because we're ending this bylaw modernization grant, and maybe we're ending the predominant focus on housing. What do we want to work on next?
May I suggest that we shift that to our next meeting that we've just added and address the
Yeah.
letter from
Sure.
Spoon, since Spoon is here?
Yeah, great, and we're getting short on time.
That's
That
weird.
sounds great, good transition.
Absolutely.
Hey Spoon, so we put your letter in the folder, and everyone, I expect, read it, but do you want to present it in a different way, or say something different than the letter says, or whatever you'd like to do?
Well, one thing
Start
I'll
us
do,
off.
and yeah, there's something else that I wrote. you don't have time to read it now, but it'll illuminate maybe some of the things I may say.
Okay.
A little bit later. I'm old school. I still do things on paper. I show up in
Papers are
person.
Thank you.
Uh,
I'm
I
doing
don't hear a
paper
word
today too. My
anybody
iPad is
says
dead,
because
so
you know
Steve
it's
hooked me up with
not-
paper. It's great. I love it. It's nice to flip things over when
I-
we're done with them.
I can send this to you online so you can send it.
Oh, to the other
other
commissioners?
people.
Sure. Okay.
I didn't think of that, I just did. So, do I have to look at that?
Nope, you just right.
So what started all this was learning about the housing ideas that Proudy is having, that you've been discussing, and coming to the conclusion, given the amount of land they have and some of the other things that they're touting, that it is a place that's ripe for a very large housing project, that there's enough land and there's everything else that they need. And of course, this town needs affordable housing. Of course, strangely, that it needs housing at all is kind of a quizzical place or circumstance, because the population of the town hasn't changed in 70 years or something like that. And quite a bit of new housing has been constructed in that time. Now, I am aware, for instance, that one of the things that changes the housing needs are smaller households. So you have, but that occurred 30 years ago. When I was on the board and we were doing a town plan and we were looking up the statistics, we found that I think it was in 1990 even, or certainly by 2000, the average household had already dropped to 2.5. And I would guess it has not changed much since then.
It's 2.0.
So that's not a driver. And so of course there are questions, why have there been as many units created over these years, no population increase, and no change in household size, and yet we constantly talk about a shortage of housing. And so there's it would always be welcome if the Planning Commission would perhaps do an analysis of that and offer the town some information and advice if it had any. Because these conversations keep on happening. They're continuing all the time. And they're not backed by data. And so people end up saying anything that they want or anything that they think or would like to say or like to believe, and there's no way to refute or analyze or know if any of that stuff is really true. And there is, if one were to go back and listen to all of the things recorded, BCTV included, and all the newspapers, all the statements at the hearings that you were having, that the town was having, not the Planning Commission, on the just cause eviction issue, and listen to the landlords, virtually everything they said was untrue. But there was no actual data to really point that out, and there was nobody in any position, there was no circumstance in which they could be held accountable for what they said. And it would seem like the town would be one place. The Planning Commission itself should have challenged the statements they made. If housing is a part of the town plan, and it is, it should be, housing is an essential need. The planning commission should have been challenging the statements made by all sides on that, so that the people of this town could understand this issue. So all this started with housing, but then it came down, as I thought of Prouty, I also thought on the more positive side that there was an opportunity here to create a neighborhood or a community that we've always envisioned. Who envisioned? What vision? So that got back, where is the vision? There is no vision in our town plan. I go around and I talk, I read the papers every day, I follow the news, I read books, I stay informed, I read the Times every day, and everybody I talk to, the only vision that they have is that maybe there isn't any future. Nevertheless, something must be guiding the decisions of the planning commission, of the town itself. What is that? And of course, in a way, there is a vision. There is a vision embedded in the structure, in the requirements of the town plan. Why does it have X chapters to it with certain names to it and certain goals and objectives? That whole plan was designed around a vision that existed in 1970 when the regional commissions were formed. It was a vision that every American should have a private home and 2 cars and a dishwasher and happy, well-educated children. And that hasn't happened. We've gotten further and further from anything like that. Maybe we don't even want that at all, considering how many people we have and the resources we have left. But essentially, that's the vision that is subtly embedded in the town plans that we keep writing over and over and over again. And if you go back through the town plans, the first one was written in 1963, and if you go back over them, they all look pretty much identical, as if nothing has really changed. A few numbers, but it's the same plan. And in fact, I think the last one, you just rolled it over. There was nothing to change. And yet day by day, week by week, month by month, the world keeps changing faster and faster. And so, part of why I stand here is to implore the Planning Commission to develop a vision. And it's in what you read here. What I recommend, among other things, is just starting with a retreat. And seeing, maybe starting the retreat with each one of you writing down what your vision is for the future. And then sitting down and seeing if anybody is anywhere near anybody else. And from there, trying to figure out a vision. Even if your vision is that you don't have one, write that down. I remember when I was on the Planning Commission, we actually wrote a section for implementing things, not just a list of all the things that should have, but actually created a short list of things that should happen soon, important things. Things that would direct the select board into action. And the select board, in all its wisdom, removed that from the plan, saying we can't plan on the future because we don't know what's gonna happen. And that's almost a quote from what one of the board members said. We can't plan for the future because we don't know what's gonna happen. Well, we don't. Or do we? Do we have a sense? I mean, we're talking about housing, and that's a good thing. I think we need to be talking about food, too. Where is food going to come from? Are we going to assume that one of the bread baskets of this country out the Imperial Valley out in California, fast running out of water, is going to be supplying us with food? Should we be thinking about saving land here for food? Should we be thinking about creating forests to cut wood to maintain our houses? What are we thinking about the future of energy? Where is that going to come from? Where is that fuel going to come from? I think this is all part of a vision. Is what, and this is very difficult. Nobody wants to talk about the future, and I think that's one of the most aggravating, dismaying, disappointing, and it goes. It's not just here in this town; it's all the way up the line. The federal government does not talk about it. Behaves like life can go on just like it is, and keep making laws burning more fossil fuels. Well, we can't do much about what happens in Washington, and we don't have a lot of control over what happens in Montpelier. We got a little bit more because we're a small state, it's unusual. But we do have some control over our town, where we live, and will be living when the supermarket shelves start showing up empty. Which some of you, I mean, I would say that would be shocking, but if you remember when the pandemic started and you walked into the supermarkets, all of a sudden there were a lot of empty shelves. Now, at that time, it was for other reasons. People weren't on the jobs in transportation industries and the shipping and the ports and everything got slowed down. But even now, you walk around and you see a lot of holes in the supermarkets. But food doesn't seem to be a shortage, but it's gotten very expensive. And so do we need to be thinking about how are we going to try and protect our food supply? Which probably means how are we going to make our own food? But anyway, all of this is part of planning. As a citizen, you are the people who need to be planning. There is nobody else. There is no other place tasked and responsible for planning our future. It is right here in this room with you. If it's too much, say so. Ask for help. That's all. Do whatever you need to do, but I need to feel, and I think I reflect a lot of people in this town, we need to feel like we're making progress towards something better, rather than picking up the newspaper every day and reading that the numbers of homeless are increased, poverty's increased, drug use is increased, affordability for housing is worse, etc., etc. There needs to be hope. And the hope can only come from facing the problems that we deal with. And I know, and I actually pulled out a quote right out of the regional planning, the Wyndham Regional Planning's front page, just written, hot off the press. It was posted on the 17th of April, I think. And it says, it's normal to feel a bit of trepidation, fear even, when asked to do something you've never done before. And that's exactly what we need our planning commission to do, is to start doing things it's never done before. And that is create a vision or create a statement that it has no vision and ask for help. But it needs to do something. And I guess it all comes back around on the more specific thing with the Proudy housing. I don't know, I have been up to talk to Chloe, and I got some information. I've been down to talk to Elizabeth at the Housing Trust and got some information there. And but I feel like the town should be playing a very active role in that, and not just in as I think I distributed to a few of you, to Tom and maybe to Sue and a few other people. I need to have it more widely distributed. If you're talking affordable housing, then it probably cannot possibly be housing which is a revenue stream for someplace else. If Proudy thinks of that housing project as a potential permanent revenue stream, whether it's through rent or what have you, affordability is probably impossible. It is also probably impossible to develop a community that we think of when we think of an ideal community if the community itself does not own the land under it. Because it is owning, in this world of private property, it is owning that land which affords a community or even a person who owns a house or a state or a country or what have you, self-determination. It enables the people who live there to make the decisions that they need to make on their own behalf to survive or to live better. And if they cannot make those decisions, then it cannot be a community where there's any self-determination. The people will not feel a commitment to the community. They will always feel just like renters. And that idea, that ideal, that vision of a kind of community we wish we could all live in will never develop. Even if the housing does. I mean, it's a million miles away just to get the housing up there built. But there's a whole different way, I think. The housing.
It's hard to interrupt because you're covering such deep and important topics, but can you try to come to
okay. All right. Well, I think that I'll just scan this. I think that I probably made my points as well as I will be able to. And I guess that's about it. Is that one? I look forward. I hope that there's a vision someday, that the planning process need not happen once every 10 years. The planning process should probably be ongoing all the time. And I think it because you do it once every 2 years and it gets too crammed, too hurried, the research doesn't get done, and it just never, I don't think it really happens the same as if you can take your time and investigate, say, one piece every year, spend a whole year on one piece and be constantly updating it. I don't know how the regional commission will respond to that. But if you talk to them and they saw the wisdom or the value in that, they may be able to help you with the grants or the money that you need, if you need any more money for that. But, all right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for listening. I'm always available.
Yeah, thank you.
And I've got, a lot of experience when I was on the board. I spent a lot of time studying planning to understand what a community was, what a municipality was, and the histories and why it is the way it is. Okay.
Yeah, Spoon, thank you very much
Thanks.
for going into, so many important topics and speaking so well and
Okay.
taking the time to write this and show up. We're over time, but I don't want to end it right after he just, put so much effort into speaking there. I see Dan's hand up. I'd like to have a little bit of interaction, at least. Of course, we could also vote to go to extend it. But we also, I think Linda came up with an idea to continue this agenda item at the May 15th meeting. So if Spoon has the energy, he could come back then. But also if there's some real pressing, Dan dropped his hand. Oh, you just wanna,
Oh, I don't know, are you,
I don't
Continuing
know,
with
I
the
think,
discussion?
I think maybe,
I'm
Oh,
not gonna
okay.
be able to stay much longer tonight.
yeah, I'm just
Um,
thinking in 5 minutes,
what
wrap
I-
it up, yeah.
Would be interested in is what I heard just now was, please create a vision. Is
Yes.
that, okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's hear what Dan has to say.
Oh, Dan.
Yes, hi. I think it's worth taking 5 minutes if that's what we're planning to do. Does that sound about right? I'll be as brief as possible.
I would like to, yeah, let's just say 8:20 hard cutoff.
Fair enough, okay. I just wanted to say, thank you as well for the challenge and also essentially the label of the fact that, planning for the future versus, some sort of speculation or prediction is difficult, but also possible. We always have to keep in mind that is what we're doing. I think you put it really well in your letter saying that, you want to talk about planning for reality. I think as far as housing is concerned, since you came back to that a few times, I think I'd like to just highlight one limitation that you're perhaps not as aware of as I've become working in housing. I'll say this publicly. It's difficult to gather data about and to make real data-based decisions, partly because we have a large influence, and I'm just going to put this as, we can talk about this more, but a large influence of the informal economy on our housing, meaning cash interactions, meaning transactions, I should say, meaning housing for labor instead of for cash, right? So there are the need that we've predicted, the rent number of 500 units, for example, I think is a real need because you have people, for example, couch surfing. You have people who would use the housing that could be made available. Just to get to that point that there really is a need for housing, and that the population numbers you refer to, while they may not have, in absolute terms, may not have changed, the composition, the profile of the population has quite, I think, dramatically. But I do really appreciate the idea, and I agree that we should be planning for reality and it may even already be the case that we actually have a articulated vision, but it may not be as robust as it could be. So I appreciate the challenge.
I'll just tack on to what you said at the end there. I think we do have a vision in the town plan, but the robustness definitely leaves something to be desired. I mean, it starts off in the introduction saying that quality of life is the predominant thing that this town plan and the implementation tools of it are aiming for. And it breaks it down into like transportation choice, affordability, sense of community, strong and vibrant downtown, public safety, good jobs. And then it just, has a couple paragraphs, and then it essentially moves on to all those 12 chapters, like you say. That can be refined. It can be thrown out and rewritten, perhaps. But it is. I see what you're saying. Even. Well, I think that is tailored a little bit, and I think the community did contribute to making that. But it's not the most responsive and targeted to, for example, the existential climate change issue that we face, as a species on Earth. It's more of just kind of a semi-enlightened take on just the average American, whatever, what the average person wants, being a property owner, let's say, in a town. One thing you brought up, Spoon, was that we should have engaged and been, challenged both sides of the housing debate during, for example, the just cause eviction. Perhaps we could have. I'd say that one way we interacted with that was we commissioned the housing action plan to be done, and some other housing projects, and they really did a deeper and more thorough analysis of the housing situation than I think admittedly, maybe any of us are willing to devote our own free time to find out on our own. So I think there's almost no chance that any of us could speak as authoritatively or knowledgeably as on that topic as that plan does. So to the extent that I think the plan answers some of the questions about change in household size and population and the reason for the shortage. Better than we could without a ton of study. But I hear you about, if we feel like there's big issues related to planning that we should, that the commission should work on, and we feel like we don't have the time or the expertise, ask others and try to get there one way or the other. But I think we'll ruminate on this and the other things said during this agenda item, and we'll take it up on May 15th, but quick reply, Spoon?
One of the things, Liz McLaughlin on the board, one of the select board members, did indicate at town meeting that she would pursue the economic data analysis from BDCC or SevEds, as they have been supposed to be doing every year, but nobody's ever leaned on them to actually do it. And I think it would be very helpful if this board sent a note to the select board and just reminding them that the data is important to you too. And that you look forward to having that report, just so it isn't, it's too easily ignored, it's too easily forgotten. And so
Okay.
you can help with that.
Yeah, I think one of the statutory powers of the Planning Commission does delve into, economic or financial aspects, but, we don't seem to have done that in my time on the commission, and there's presumably other, departments or commissions and bodies in the town that maybe some towns in Vermont don't have, but we do here in Brattleboro. But food for thought. I'm not rejecting it, I'm just saying maybe that's why we haven't considered those things so far. Yep.
Can I just go back to the May 15th meeting, because
Sure.
what was going to be something short is
Oh.
now all of a sudden getting longer, and I'm just, is that what?
Well, it's just whatever
Is that
we
what we
decide
want?
it's whatever we decide to bring up and talk about. regarding.
Okay, so I should plan on a 2-hour meeting.
At
Um,
least.
Well, I mean,
Not
like I
more
have,
than a 2-hour
I have
meeting,
like
though.
4 days to plan something,
Oh, oh.
so that's why I'm kind of like.
Nothing.
Zoom bomb, yeah.
We're
I
getting
think,
bombed.
I think if we focused on, what we believe is,
We're gonna have to shut this down.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
We'll just give like
we have
15
bombers on there,
15
yeah.
minutes to the
Have boring time.
Joe Biden.
There you go.
Okay.
You can remove that one, yeah.
if, since the agenda, Sue, that you have is brief, any remaining time we could devote to other topics. And that'll be that.
Want to forward that to Sue?
I-
can bring it up.
Well, for the looking ahead thing, I'm mostly just looking for that agenda item to be commissioners espousing their priorities for the coming year. It doesn't have to be what we're getting into with a big philosophical talk.
Okay.
And we don't have to answer the questions of the philosophical talk. If we decide that one of our priorities is to do a philosophical, project, then that's what we'll do over the coming months. But I don't mean for the agenda item to be that way. And so I think we should end it because we have a cutoff time that we've
Motion
gone
to
over.
dismiss?
And no other members of the public have to do that public comment period, so.
Is that the end of that?
Yep,
Okay.
thank you, Scoot.
All right, thank you.
We're adjourned.
So when did your Zoom bombers ever come back? I guess that's a lesson learned.